everyone, so today we are going to study about Swedish history.
Yes, Gustav Vasa, the father of Sweden. It's an amazing buy me a coffee suggestion. Thank you so much. The link is going to be in the video description. Let's go. Gustav Vasa.
Let's go.
King
Part
Gustav
one, there's two
Vasa
parts.
is one of Sweden's most
really look like
important
this.
monarchs, and in this two-part series we will cover his wars against Denmark, as well as how his reign laid the foundation for the Swedish Empire.
Damn. Remember, Sweden and Denmark, they fought more than any other country. And now they're buddy-buddy.
The three Scandinavian kingdoms, Sweden, Norway and Denmark, had ever since the late 14th century been part of a political union known as the Kalmar Union.
Norway look really far.
And not only that, look at their flag. It's like a lion holding an axe. Holding a whipping. or
Been
something.
part of a political union known as the Kalmar Union.
Kalmar
The
Union.
original idea behind the union was that the three kingdoms would be united under one king, yet retain their own laws and customs. This way, the union was
Viking.
intended to ensure peace between the three kingdoms, as well as protection from outside forces.
One king for the three, but they all are independent of each other. But they have like one spiritual leader. I
From
think
its inception,
it's
however,
not a bad idea.
the union was plagued by conflict, especially between Denmark and Sweden.
Of course.
Several kings, most of whom were Danes, were accused of levying unjust taxes on the Swedish peasantry, as well as dragging Sweden into wars of aggression without the consent of the Swedish Reichscouncil.
The
The tensions led to many peasant uprisings occurring in Sweden
This is still
throughout
happening in
the 15th
2026.
century that often were
Not in
supported by
Sweden though,
Swedish
but-
noblemen who took advantage of the unrest to improve their political positions. In the mid-15th century, a nobleman called Karl Knutsson Bonde declared himself to be the king of Sweden. with
But the guy speaking, look,
Bonde.
he looks Swedish, right?
Yeah.
He has a great accent. You're right, Norway, but it's because the map is different, right? The way the map was shaped, I think because of the ocean and the climate change, I think it moved. Because it looked weirdly shaped now, a little bit.
Yeah, it's not long like this.
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
support from
Well, it's because the north is now owned by Sweden, but back then it was not Sweden, right? What is the yellow and the blue on top? Which country is that? Is it Russia?
Finland?
large sections of the
Finland
land's
was not on the map, I
clergy
think.
and
Was
nobility.
it back on the map?
Despite
don't
bloody
think so.
conflicts with the Danish crown, he managed to hold on to the title until his death in 1470, and even after his death, the kings of Denmark were not accepted as the rulers of Sweden, though the union remained in some sense
Oh, wait, no,
as the
no.
ruler.
The red is all the same thing. So it's Denmark? I'm confused. Because Norway is not that part. This is Denmark. This is like Copenhagen and Malmo on the other side.
Even this red. This
Yeah.
is also red. But he has
Rulers of
three flags.
Sweden.
Maybe
Though
Norway
the
belonged to
union
Denmark back
remained
then?
in some sense,
No, no,
the
it was a
Swedish
different
throne was
flag.
empty
I'm
and would
confused.
remain empty until the early 16th century. Instead,
Picture.
Sweden was governed by the Reichscouncil, a governmental body consisting of Sweden's bishops and members of its high nobility. At the turn of the 16th century, the council was divided into two factions, known as the Unionists, who wanted the council to swear allegiance to the crown of Denmark, and the Separatists, who wanted Sweden to cut all
Of
ties
course.
to the Kalmar Union in favor of becoming an independent kingdom. In 1512, the leader of the Unionist faction, Erik Trolle, managed to become the leader
Erik
of the
Trolle.
council, giving the Unionists the upper hand and increasing the likelihood that the Danish monarchs once again would rule over Sweden. The election, however, was revoked by the leader of the separatists, Sten Sture, who rallied the peasantry and enough of the nobility to his side, and forcefully removed Trolle from his position as the head of the council and claimed the position for himself. Around the same time, a new king was crowned in Denmark called Christian II. Witness
Oh no,
was
it's
crowned
because look, it's because of the map. The way that it turned around. Norway's somewhere up that we don't see on the map.
in Denmark called Christian II.
Christian the
Witnessing the political intrigues that were happening in Sweden, as
Never
well as
heard
his
of this guy.
predecessors' inability to regain
Christian
control
the
of the
Second?
country,
Nope, never heard
he
of him.
realized that he would never gain the Swedish crown through diplomatic means.
Ah,
Between 1517 and 1520, Christian launched several invasion
course.
attempts against Sweden, most of whom were pushed back by the separatists' forces. In 1520, however, Sten Sture, the leader of the separatists, died in battle, leaving the separatists disorganized and leaderless. This made them unable to mount an effective defense, and the Danish king soon laid siege to Stockholm.
bro,
realizing that
I'm
he wouldn't
so
be
happy
able-
that Sweden and Denmark are out of this mentality.
Yeah.
If we cannot talk, we're gonna invade because we are more powerful.
Mm.
That's literally how the world works in 2026, by the way.
Also, Israel too.
Israeli tourists right now in Thailand are just acting completely
They
wild.
are chasing people out of the island like they are doing to Palestine.
Yeah. Finally, you're seeing what it is for what it. Wow, I'm proud of you now.
To storm
Finally,
the
you're
city.
seeing that.
Christian
And the more
decided-
important thing is my police, my Thai citizen, my government doesn't even like, do you know what they said? They said Israelian, they are a good person.
Yeah, most of them are. But they come to Thailand and they think that they somehow have control now. They can do whatever they want, which is not that dissimilar to American tourists a lot of the time, to be honest. But America and Israel is just the same country basically at this
to
point.
pardon
Okay,
the
anyway,
separatists in exchange for their surrender. The separatist leaders agreed, and Christian was crowned King of Sweden soon after. A feast was arranged, which lasted for 3 days at Stockholm Castle, attended by Unionists and former separatists alike. Unfortunately for the separatists, the Danish king would soon reveal his true intentions regarding their pardon.
of course.
In the middle of the third night, the doors of Stockholm Castle were shut, and the former separatists
Wow,
were
it's a
arrested
trap.
by the king's soldiers. What had been a celebration turned into a trial, as the Danish kings, as well as Swedish Unionists, launched accusations against their former
It is
enemies.
them.
When the trial
real
was
people
over,
face, right?
King
Because they look the
Christian
same.
sentenced
Well,
They just draw it.
back then they could
Spaghetti.
write. So I think it's quite authentic, the design.
Oh, but yeah, the face one looks
Yeah,
similar,
yeah.
so similar.
Some are random people, but I think the king, the queen, and stuff like this, I think it's pretty authentic because he still had pen. You could draw people, and people
Yeah.
were good at drawing. So
their enemies. When the trial was over, King Christian
Like-
sentenced all of the separatists
he probably looked similar to that because they could draw him. So I think at least this is fairly
leaders
authentic.
to death. On a cold November day, most members of the old council were beheaded at the main square
Damn.
in Stockholm.
You know what behead
the
means?
executed included bishops,
Cut.
no
The head.
Uh,
This is so barbaric. It is crazy.
why crazy?
Well, it still happens these days in some country, to be honest.
Oh,
So
I want it happen to my country so much.
this thing, I don't think the death penalty in Thailand is so rare.
Oh,
It's so rare.
noblemen, servants, administrators,
But like in North Korea,
as
they
well as
do
the
that
mayor
still.
of Stockholm. In total, around 80 to 100 people were killed, most through beheading, and the streets ran red with blood. The punishment would not end there, however, since
course.
some of the Unionists were leading members of the Catholic Church in Sweden. Like bishops and archbishops, the separatists were declared to be heretics, and once they'd been executed, their bodies were torn apart and burnt in 3
Of
large
course.
bonfires. In
Jesus,
fact,
you guys were
the
mad.
Unionists went so far as to dig up the body of the late separatist leader Sten Sture and burnt it with the rest. When the smoke had settled, King Christian's rule over Sweden, and thus Scandinavia as a whole, seemed to be unchallenged. Most of the separatist leaders were dead, and those that remained were disorganized, and without the power to pose a serious challenge to the crown of Denmark.
Jesus Christ.
This, however, would not be the end of the story. From the ashes of the bonfire, a new land would rise. The Middle Ages were coming to an end, and a new era dawned on the horizon.
Before the Renaissance, right? The new rebellion. Who?
Following the executions of the separatists, the Danish king traveled what's called Eriksgatan, roughly
Eriksgatan.
translated as Eric's Road. According to tradition, the kings of Sweden, upon their coronation, are obliged to journey through the realm's most important regions
Oh,
to have their
wow.
crown accepted by the region's elders, thus acknowledging them as the true kings of the Swedes.
They have no
Christian's
technology.
journey,
This
however,
is good.
would be quite different from those of former kings.
Uh-oh.
In most places he arrived, he executed influential noblemen and clergy
Jesus.
who had been former separatists.
Wow,
causing
that's a
bad
mega
blood,
piece of
civil unrest among the people he visited. It wasn't long before peasant uprisings broke out. The uprisings were partially a reaction to the harsh actions of Christian, but also to new taxes the king imposed on the Swedish peasantry.
This is literally like Game of Thrones. He's that guy is literally a main villain in Game of
As well as
Thrones.
a campaign he had started to disarm the Swedish peasantry, which the peasants saw as a violations against their ancient rights to protect themselves against unjust rulers. In several places, the rebels successfully fought back against King Christian's forces. One such rebellion in a northern region
Christian.
called Dalarna, roughly translated
Dalarna?
to the valleys, were led by a young nobleman who soon would come to be the central character in this story.
Oh, who's that?
Gustav Eriksson Vasa was born in 1496 and was a member of the Swedish high nobility. Not much is known of his early life, except that his family was part of the
I
Wow, not much.
I
No.
completely forgot that it was about him now. Now he's the Vasa. Is it the ship? The fish that sink and he
Swedish
got it back and out there's a museum,
During a
right?
battle against Unionist forces in 1518, Gustav was taken prisoner and held captive in the Danish castle called Karlö. He managed to escape to the city of Lübeck in 1519 and then made his way back to Sweden in 1520. At the time of his arrival, the leader of the separatists, Sten Sture, had just died, and King Christian was besieging Stockholm. Not sure what to do, he decided to lay low at his family estate in Räffnes, where he, in November 1520, received the news of the executions in Stockholm. Among the people who had lost their head was his father, Erik Johansson Vasa, who was the mayor of Stockholm, mentioned earlier. And if this
so
wasn't
he
bad
really,
enough,
really Nobel.
Gustav was also
The
informed that the new
nobleman,
king
nobleman.
officially had confiscated all of his family's lands and estates, and that the Danes were searching for him. Unable to stay in Räffnes, Gustav decided to fight back, and to do so he journeyed north to Dalarna to rally the people to his cause. The people in the region were tough. More or less everyone had weapons, and they had a tradition of rising up in rebellion several times during the 15th century. Hearing the news that the Danes were planning to take their weapons, they agreed to take up arms and declared Gustav to be their leader. What
Damn.
started off as a band of a few dozen
Damn, can
quickly
have this
grew
as a
into a
movie.
force of
Yeah. I think
several
they probably had a
thousands.
movie about
And
this.
though only consisting of armed peasants, the army still managed to defeat the Unionists' forces that were sent against them. One such victory was at Brunbäck River, where the peasants managed to defeat a Danish army roughly the same size. And
Well,
after
all they had to do when they took Gustav to jail as to kill him, and none of that story would have happened. they
afterwards,
literally didn't
several
know that
noble
he was gonna be the
families,
beast
as well
in the
as several
story.
important cities defected to the rebels. A year into the war, Gustav managed to enter into an alliance with Lübeck, who provided the rebellion with loans, weapons, as well as naval support,
Lübeck is not in
allowing
Sweden.
Gustav to
It's in
What's Lübeck? Familiar.
it's in Germany, no? Yeah, Lübeck it's in North Germany.
Oh, okay, the city.
Yeah, it's in North
rely
Germany.
less on the armed peasantry in favor of paid soldiers. Much of the Danes' problems in dealing with the rebels were caused by troubles the Danish king had
Well,
gotten
back then it
himself
was not, I guess.
into during his campaigns to take the Swedish crown.
See, Lund.
In order to finance his campaigns between 1517 and 1520, Christian had taken loans from the Hanseatic trade cities, as well as introduced new taxes on the Danish peasantry. The Danish peasants, like their Swedish counterparts, were not happy with this, and the Hanseatic lenders were starting to put pressure on Christian to pay them back. In addition, had his brutal treatment of the Swedish separatists, several of whom were clergy, angered the Catholic Church officials in Denmark, as well as in Rome, and when the wars against the Swedes went bad, many of King Christian's supporters lost faith in him. In 1523, a rebellion broke out in Jylland that were led by Danish noblemen, which
To be fair, and it's the same for the Germany during World War II, when you have someone who's so authoritarian like this, right? It's not necessarily that you like him, it's that if you're not with him, you're against him. But once he become weaker, a lot of people that didn't like him much to begin with can easily switch side.
Yeah.
Because it was never about I like him. It was mostly about, well, do I have a choice? I kind of need to do that, or
forced Christian
die,
to flee
you know?
Denmark, with the Danish crown going to his uncle Frederick I. With Christian gone, and his successor unable to enforce his claim to the throne, the Swedish rebels successfully captured Stockholm in June 1523. On the 6th of June, Gustav Vasa marched into Stockholm, and as the leader of the rebellion, he was declared King of Sweden by the separatists soon after.
wow.
The rebels' entry into Stockholm has traditionally been seen as a dividing line in Swedish history. The Middle Ages were over, and the early modern era dawned. All political ties to the Kalmar Union were severed, and Sweden became an independent realm. Gustav Vasa's story would not end here, however. The new kingdom was poor, and the state's finances were in shambles, and while the Danes had been driven out, there was still unrest among the peasantry. As the King of Sweden, Gustav had to deal with these issues, and during his long reign, which we will cover in part 2 of this series, he would transform the country down to its core.
Damn.
Today, I hope you learned something new about the history of Gustav Vasa.
I think it's the best video about history of Sweden that I've ever seen because it make it easier to understand.
Yes. But you know what? Sometimes, for example, when they make a TV show or the movie, they always, for example, this show, a good person will be a bad person, and the other show, a bad person will be a good person. So it make us believe that, oh, what is the real story exactly? So that's why they often say the winner always being right, like write the history, thing like that. They're always gonna worship themselves, thing like that.
Gonna react to the next part soon. Let us know in the comment. Explain us what we just saw so we are ready for part 2.
Yes.
This looked great. Thank you for watching, everyone.